It is 11:01. Good morning, it is 11:01. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Wallace. I'm the project manager for Give STL Day 2025. We are going to have our session this morning, Know Before You Go, a practical introduction to grant funds. Our host this morning, our presenter this morning, excuse me, is Patrice Shumate of about A Village for Good. Patrice is a social worker and a grant writer. And she's been 16 years working in nonprofit organizations and social services. She's the founder of A Village for Good. And Patrice will tell you a little bit more about herself. Patrice, they're all yours.
Good morning. It's nice to see everybody on this Monday. Um, just a quick reminder in case you haven't today, it's okay to just slow down and take a breath. Take a drink of water if you haven't hydrated. This year already in particular has been a lot, especially for people in the nonprofit and small business space. So I think it's fine that we acknowledge that each day comes with its own challenges and take a minute, couple minutes, multiple times throughout the day to remind us that our health and our wellness matter in doing this work. So ground yourself when you need to, take a breath when you need to. I'm Patrice. I am a founder of A Village for Good. It's a small nonprofit support business, primarily serving people here in the St. Louis area, although I do have clients elsewhere and I work with subcontractors around the country. And yeah, I've been a social worker for a really long time, and I started this business about 6 years ago because I recognized there's a lot of gaps in philanthropy and nonprofit and social good funding for people that don't have access or resources to bring in folks or hire people to help them do the work that brings more money in the door. And so we work on growth and learning and affordability in the grant readiness and grant writing space. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I have a business page and a personal page, and our business page does a lot of like resources and topics that you can get tapped into. So be comfortable. You can have camera on or off. It's totally up to you. It's nice when I can engage with the people on the call, but we're going to move pretty quickly. So I just did this presentation for the St. Louis County Library as the first of a two-part series, and I normally have about an hour and a half to do it. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through the information. Do not wait until the end to ask questions. The chat will be monitored. If you have a question or a thought or need a little more clarification or information, put that in the chat, and then happy to be interrupted, and we'll address those things as they come up. If you have any accessibility needs, please also share those in the chat. If you're like Patrice, you're just talking too fast for me to follow, let me know and I'll try to slow down. Okay, so today we're going to cover a whole range of things. The truth about charitable giving, what you need to know before you get into this world, types of funding for impact-driven work, grant readiness, grant research, writing and management, identifying your needs, tools and resources, high level of all of these things. We're not going to get in depth on any particular thing necessarily, but these are the nuggets you need to know if you're thinking, hey, do grant funds need to exist in my work? So the goal for today, you're not going to be able to leave ready to launch your grant program in your organization or ready to move on to all of the grant opportunities that you think might exist for you. The goal is that you know the opportunities and the challenges that exist in grant funding, that you understand there is a cost to the free money that we think exists out there, and feeling more prepared in your decision making for what needs to come next for you. So really grounding you where you are, understanding what's ahead, so that you can make good, effective, efficient choices that are not costing you time and money. So before we jump into understanding grant work, a couple of things that are helpful for me to know. So in the chat, if you're able to, can you let me know if you're here to learn about grants for nonprofit organizations, grants for small businesses, or if neither of those, what kind of grant work you're looking to understand? Nonprofit, nonprofit, okay. Both. A lot of nonprofits. Okay. Okay, good, 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 good. And give me a sense of the nonprofit you're here on behalf of. Is it brand new, newly formed, or is it's been formed for a while, you've been around for a little bit, but grant funds are kind of a new type of revenue you're thinking of bringing in? Oh, okay. Some really established groups here. New member of an established organization. Okay, so we have some new folks and some old orgs, some new orgs, and so we have a mix. Okay. Okay, good to know. Thank you all for sharing that. Okay, this is good. Just as a heads up, there's going to be some small business stuff thrown in here because I know that was sort of part of who this was open to. Grants, the ones we're going to be talking about, especially private dollars, are just more heavily focused on nonprofits. So the information is going to be skewed toward nonprofits. If you're looking for for-profit business grants, it's really kind of a different realm, and we'll touch on it briefly, but I won't go into a lot since most of you here are with nonprofit organizations. Oh, okay. Hi, Sia. How are you? I don't see you on the thing, but you just, um, okay. So, have any of you ever heard of the social change ecosystem framework? Anyone? You can nod or thumbs up or no? It's wonderful. And it's something that I reference a lot. And it's something that has made a really big impact in how I understand my role in the work that needs to be done in and for a community. And it was created by a woman named Deepa Iyer, although recently I heard it pronounced Deepa Iyer, so I'm not actually sure. And I really encourage you to look it up and get familiar with it. It lists out 10 roles that are required for justice and community impact and mission-driven work. And those of us who are in this space, who care about something deeply, who are trying to make a difference for people around us, we tend to show up in a realm of limited resources, thinking we have to do all of those things and we have to be all of those things. And that's what creates burnout really, really quickly. And these roles are wonderful to take some time to understand and realize, you know what, some of these just fit better for me. I don't have to be all the things, and I'm not good at being all of the things. And it reminds us to seek out the people in our networks and our community that have those complementing roles and skills and traits. So for me, when I look at this, I see myself as a disruptor. I'm someone who is driven to say out loudly when things are a problem and to do what I can to fix something for the better. I'm not very good at, let's see, being a caregiver or a healer because I tend to move forward pretty quickly and I don't spend a lot of time taking time to let people heal through what they've experienced or offer those sorts of healing skills. I'm trained in it as a social worker, but I realized I didn't become a clinical social worker for a reason. I've always thought more systems, more macro. And so this is one thing that I think can be really useful when you get to step points in the work that you're doing to remind yourself, okay, these are the parts I do really well. This is what I need to focus on. Maybe there's someone else I need to find or another group I need to find to help with the things that aren't quite matching up here. So I wanted to just share this for you to explore when you have the time. All right, let's get into revenue. So for nonprofits, different types of revenue, and many of you might be familiar with this, so we'll go kind of quickly through it. We have individual donors, of course, corporate donors, foundation and grant-making organizations, government funds, membership dues, major gifts, fundraising events, sponsorship, earned income, endowments, in-kind benefits, crowdfunding. There are a lot of places that revenue can come into a nonprofit organization. And there is a lot of conversation, especially lately, on diversify your revenue streams. Well, what does that mean? And what really makes sense for an organization? Are you small and you're new and you're not likely going to be able to diversify into many of these things? Are you an organization that's been around for 50 or 60 years and your funding has primarily been through a very specific type of government grant funding and now you're trying to figure out what comes next, right? The individual decisions for these types of revenue really make sense based on your individual needs as the organization and what the leadership is capable of exploring. So you can't just say, oh, we've relied on government grants forever. We need to move into events. You're going to have to bring somebody in to help you with that because you probably don't have someone on your staff who's experienced in the work it takes to do that. I don't do individual Donor stuff. I'm not very good at it. That's why I focus on the grant side because that's where my skills are. These all take very different types of skill sets and very different types of processes to bring these dollars in the door. So whenever you have the ability to explore them, absolutely do that and see where things can come in, because relying on one or two sources, as we see now, can get really kind of scary. Are there any questions about some of these specific types of revenue? I want to make sure I'm not going too quickly. Okay. Small business. Oh, there's a question. Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you explain what crowdfunding is?
Sure. Right. So, um, oh, now I'm blanking. What's the big platform where you can just go if you see someone that says, "Oh, such and such family had
Oh,
GoFundMe.
GoFundMe." So, something to know about GoFundMe. It's huge, and they are really exploring how they fit into not only individual interests in giving to different things, but how they fit kind of into charitable giving as a whole. So, understanding how platforms like that work to bring mass amounts of people that are giving small amounts of money all at one time, whether it's through GoFundMe or some other platform. There's a number of kind of tech related things that you can do to engage donors in that way. Some organizations have really specific campaigns where at a certain time of year, that's really the goal. Like they may do major gifts some other time or an event, but maybe one particular time of year, they blast everything through social media. They have a place for people to go to give $20, $30. And they say $40 gets you, creates this impact in your community. So those types of opportunities to bring in lots of people and have like a shared value around a particular topic.
thank you.
So really quickly for small business revenue, government contracts, government grants, investors, earned income, crowdfunding, and loans. And the reality is there aren't a lot of private foundation style grants for small businesses. It's not to say that they don't exist, but they don't exist in high quantities. And it usually comes through something like a program related investment, fiscal sponsorship type of relationship. It's not your traditional grant program opportunities for funding that way. So wanted to just mention that. And like we talked about, what type of revenue makes sense when? Fully depends. Depends on your organization, depends on where you are, depends on who's doing the work, depends on what you need. And those can be hard things to figure out. If you're brand new and you're just trying to figure it out as you go, it's going to take some time. There's going to be a lot of stumbling. If you're a larger organization that's been around and you need to explore some new revenue, it can also be really challenging. It's hard to move a big ship, right? So, oftentimes what happens is they say to the existing people, hey, now you need to do this to bring in revenue. And those people are like, well, I'm not trained in those kinds of things. So knowing where there are resources in your organization is really helpful in knowing where to find the expertise you need to do something differently than you've always done it. So let's talk for a second about charitable giving. And I think this is really important. And it's one thing in A Village for Good that we take a lot of time in recognizing and understanding as we're thinking of private grant dollars available to communities, to nonprofit organizations. And I actually have two kind of bits of information on the slide. So this chart is for 2022. The information written over here is for 2023. And they're pretty consistent in one another. But just as we look at this pie here, and I know the words are kind of small, the thing to take away is when we're looking at all of the charitable dollars given in any particular year here in the United States, this yellow part of the pie comes from individuals. And so what happens is I have a lot of organizations come to me frequently thinking that grant funds are going to be the biggest part of their pie and get them where they need to be to a sustainable revenue kind of place. And the reality that we see is most organizations the larger chunk of revenue they have is coming from those individual donor solicitations or coupled with major gifts, right? So this combination of reaching out to individual people to support the work that you're doing. This maroon chunk here, this is foundation giving, and it's only about 21%. And it's actually kind of decreasing when you think about cost of living and inflation and those sorts of things. And so it's important to remember when you're thinking about exploring grant funds and the work and the time that needs to go into seeking out grant funds, if you're planning on that being your largest source of revenue, it's going to be a really long game for you to get there. And there are going to be very specific strategic things you need to do to make that happen. Also, this blue one down here is corporate giving. It's the 6% of it. And we know that money coming from corporations is also decreasing. It used to be about 2% of their assets about a decade ago. And right now we're sitting at less than 1% of what corporations are giving to their communities in charitable ways. So in 2023, some more context for you to understand charitable giving. There's about $550 billion transacted, and 67% of that came from millions and millions of individuals, with 19% of that 550 from private foundations, right? So there are charitable paths that groups, people, individuals can take to say, I want to give money charitably. I'm going to put it in this account. It's not going to be taxed. It can grow in assets because it can be invested in certain places. And they've made a choice to no longer have control of that money, although they do, but legally it's not under their control anymore because they have decided to give it charitably. And for foundations, they have to give 5% of their assets every year. That's one of the regulations of having untaxed money move in for charitable purposes. And they typically hover around that 5% mostly across the board. Of course, there's outliers. But when you think about there's still 95% of their assets sitting in an account, not going into a community, it makes you wonder, okay, what's going on here? And right now there's about $1 trillion, a little bit over $1 trillion sitting in charitable accounts that are not being granted out. And so one of the things in A Village for Good is us keeping people informed so that maybe collectively we can empower the grant makers and the foundations and these charitable givers in our communities to give more. And I think right now is especially a good time for us to be having those kinds of conversations and encourage people with access to this extreme amount of wealth to move it into their communities at a higher rate. So more context for you. There's about 1.8 million nonprofit organizations registered in the United States, and about 1.3 of those are 501c3s. So if you're new to the nonprofit game, there are a lot of nonprofit designations. The ones we tend to think of more and the ones that grant makers tend to give more to are registered 501c3 organizations, working charities. Now, it's important to know that 76% of those have annual revenues of less than $100,000 and 89% have revenues of less than $500,000. So most registered 501c3s in the United States have budgets under $500,000. And when we're thinking of what things we need to invest in to increase our revenue, to do more impact-driven work in our communities, it's kind of sobering to realize such a small percent of organizations are in the millions of dollars of range doing high impact kinds of things. And so if you are one of these organizations and one of these budgets, you're in good company, right? And of course, this also counts organizations that are registered but not working. Maybe someone started one and it's not working anymore. So that's definitely built into the statistic. Let's keep moving. So there's a little thing up here about donor advised funds, and we're going to get into those in a second. But first, I wanted to also share, just because we tend not to know this in our communities, in Missouri, there are 32,898 registered 501c3 and 501c4 organizations. Almost 33,000 organizations registered in the state of Missouri. In St. Louis County, there's 6,794, and in St. Louis City, there's 2,466. And so this should lead into conversations in your organizations or with people who are exploring grant work for your organization to understand you're going to be up against a lot of other nonprofits. right? What is it about the work that you're doing that stands out? What kinds of collaborations exist that you can say dollars are going as far as possible because grant funders are looking at that. And if they get applications for 25 different youth backpack programs, right? They're going to be looking to see what's the difference between them. So if you know that you are serving a group that a lot of other organizations are serving, it's important for you to understand their services, to see if there's collaboration opportunities. Because while we don't like to call it a competitive place, it really is. You're being viewed against other organizations doing similar things. And it's important to remember that when you're going into grant work. I see something coming up in the chat. Do I need to? I'm happy to share the slide deck. Since this is through the St. Louis Community Foundation, I think it's up to them what happens with it. But yeah, you're welcome to have all these slides. And I actually have a resource sheet. There's going to be a lot of things that I have links to that I put in a sheet that you're also welcome to have afterward. Okay, so really quickly about donor advised funds, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock. How many of you are familiar with donor advised funds? Anybody? Yay, nay, maybe. Heard of them, don't really know what they are. Nope, Holly says nope. I know the St. Louis Community Foundation is familiar with donor advised funds. It's one of the types of assets they manage here in the community. Okay, so we're going to get into it really quickly, and it's important to understand, one, because money that comes out of them are called grants, but not as we tend to know them as the grants that we apply to. But because there has been an astronomical rise in the number of donor advised funds opening and the amount of money going into them, and also money coming out of them. So really quickly, super brief overview. This chart shows you from 2008 to 2022, money going into private foundations and into donor advised funds. You can see that money going into private foundations has stayed really pretty consistent over quite a long time. Money going into donor advised funds has taken off in the last decade-ish. And last year, not last year, I guess, 2022 or 23, I forget. They reached, what was it, $250 billion in assets in donor advised funds. The number of funds being opened is going up, although that kind of came down a little bit last year. The number of dollars going into that is increasing. And then the number of dollars growing inside the funds continues to increase. And so donor advised funds are an individual or a group saying, hey, I have some wealth. Maybe I want to give it charitably, and they can go to a place like the St. Louis Community Foundation or some other DAF sponsor is what they're called. And that sponsor will manage the money for them. Now they hand it over. They don't have access to it anymore as the individual or the family. They can make recommendations of where they want it to go. And that money is granted out to eligible organizations. So you have to be a 501c3. It can't be used for any other types of organizations. And it's a pretty easy transaction when you're thinking about how grant applications work. So what often happens is, and I've worked with I can't say often, but I've worked with organizations that some dollars have come in the door and it might say, you got a check from the ABC Foundation, and they come to me and they say, oh, we got this money. And I say, we didn't write a grant for that. What is it? And we do a little bit of exploring and find out that it's a donor advised fund. And so usually there was an individual somewhere that had an interest in the services or the work that was happening there. They told their DAF sponsor, I want to give $10,000 to this organization or whatever it is. And that transaction happens. And because of the growth and the interest in donor advised funds, well, part of that growth is because of how easy it is for the fund donor to open it and put money into it, and how easy it is for them to send money out of it. They don't have the same kinds of regulations that foundations and trusts do. But people are recognizing this transaction happening. And so they're creating things like DAF buttons for you to put on your website. So a fund holder can see that it's really easy and they can go to their DAF sponsor and say, hey, just I want to do it here and I want to give my money. So some of those technological advances are popping up to make the transaction happen even more. So it's something we're keeping an eye on, to understand there could be some relationship building opportunities in your community to start to tap into the billions of dollars that now exist in these DAF funds. So real quick overview on that. I'm not going to go into these, but I do link to them on the page you'll get afterward to really get a sense of what kind of money is charitable money, who has access to it, and who's not getting access to it, and what does it take to participate in this grant fund space. I think these are really helpful articles to get you fully aware and grounded on what you're stepping into. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I think it's useful to mention the balance of government funds, private funds, other types of revenue, and how government funding typically works for nonprofits is it can come directly from your local municipality or your state, right? So there's funds that exist, there's taxpayer dollars that exist locally, and sometimes they have grant opportunities there. What happens a lot of times is, until recently, the federal government will have priorities and that will trickle down into states or cities or counties. Sometimes you can get money directly from federal programs through HHH or SAMHSA or, VA or some of these programs that exist depending on what you're trying to serve. And you can get grants, you can get sub-grants, you can get contracts. So the way the dollars come down is really pretty varied. There are always a lot of regulations. The applications are really intense. There's a lot that goes into government funding. We don't do a lot of government grant applications at A Village for Good because most of the organizations we work for are not have an administrative capacity to handle what it takes to apply and then manage the funds and the compliance because there's a lot of work that goes into that. I'm not going to go into this because we're not going to get into a lot. Well, do you guys want to get into government funds or do you want to just focus on the private stuff? I'll let you decide. Let me know what you think. Private. A little bit of yes. Okay. Mostly private. Okay. So I'll just quickly say, up until this year, government funds changed and they ebb and flow based on national needs, based on things going on a state level, different priorities. Things kind of always change and shift when new presidential administrations come in or Congress decides something. So there's a lot of that's flowing, but there are a lot of consistencies that exist in government funds up until now. And there's a lot up in the air. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because quite honestly, no one really knows what's happening or where things are going to go as it stands with federal dollars coming down to support organizations. But before all of this, there were hundreds of billions of dollars that were available for people to come in and say, hey, we're doing this work. We recognize it's a priority of the government. We're able to come contract with you. And it could be reimbursable dollars. Sometimes it is a lump grant that can come in. But a lot of times it's a contract arrangement that you are going to do services that matter in this particular area. I'm going to skip the small business stuff. But starting at the end of January, and there was a lot that happened in February related to what government funds were available. Things were being frozen. There were lawsuits happening. There's just a lot going on. And so there are a couple of places keep up to date on that kind of information. The National Council on Nonprofits is a great one to keep up to date with, as they're one of the ones that are bringing lawsuits against some of these executive orders and decisions coming out of the DOJ office. So if you want to keep up with that, it's a good place to start. Okay, so let's talk about grants. What they are, where to find them, how to secure them. But before we talk about that, we have to talk about grant readiness. So one of the things I do more often than any other thing with the organizations that come to A Village that we work with is getting everything in place. So if you come to me and you say, hey, we've been an organization for 10 years, we've never done grant writing, there is a grant we want to apply to next month, I'm going to say, okay, but there's probably a lot we need to do to get you ready, not just for that application, but to make that application effective and efficient and ready for the next application. So grant writing is part of a coordinated, balanced funding approach to supporting an organization's programs and mission. So somebody somewhere needs to have a conversation before you bring a grant writer in the door to say, we've looked at our budget, we've looked at our revenue sources, we've got a sense kind of the philanthropic giving in our community, or we need to find that out, right? And we want to work toward X number of dollars through private grant dollars this year. Let's bring someone on to help us with the process and to make it really effective. Grant funding is really tricky for newer organizations. Funders tend not to want to fund seed things or startups. So a lot of smaller and newer organizations need to be focused on that individual donor recruitment, and because you're showing that the community cares about what you're doing. So a funder can come in and invest in what you're doing, understanding there's sort of a community match that's going on there. And making sure you have everything in place to show that you are making a difference in your community. And then being prepared for, once the dollars are there, can you manage them? Can you handle them? Do you have the ability to handle any sort of reports or compliance that come in with it? And I've worked with small enough organizations that we've worked really hard for a very specific chunk of funding for a very specific thing. And the money came in the door and the organization still kind of fell apart because it was probably a one-person shop, and maybe they got burnt out and left and there was nobody to come in and pick it up. So those things happen, and it's important to understand, if the dollars come in, what are we going to be able to do with them? What requirements are going to be put on us? And so here I talk about impact flow, and this was a little chart that I came up with because it's really surprising to me how often I'm working with organizations that don't really have a sense of what they're trying to impact. You know, that maybe the organization started because someone saw there was a need and they had access to some resources and they really wanted to be a part of the solution to that. And so they had an idea, let's do this, let's try this. And I say, okay, but ultimately, if you're going to report to somebody what you accomplished, what's that going to be? And it kind of, the conversation gets sort of lost. And understanding what growth needs to look like to get to that big impact. I worked with somebody once that was doing survivor resources for people who had been in a domestic violence situation, had escaped, they were now survivors and trying to rebuild their life. And so they were creating resources for the rebuilding phase of someone's life. And they had these big plans. And they had only been around for about 2 years and had tried some different things. And I said, you know, all in, if you needed the money to do all of the things that you're talking about, how much would that be? And they're like, oh, well, maybe $750,000. Well, you're not going to get $750,000 out of the gate from grant funds. So understanding what you're able to accomplish today, working toward a larger goal in the future, and building over time. So one of the things that's important and that we work on a lot with the organizations that we're working with is sitting down and understanding, okay, what are you working toward? What's the main goal here? What's your impact that you're saying you're trying to achieve? What are your goals to get there? Really identifying what it's going to take to get there, and then the objectives, the specific things you're working on to accomplish your goals. And those need to be informed by data. You need to be able to say, we have researched our community. We understand the need that exists. And we can show you that by citing this data point, this data point, this data point. We know what already exists in our community because we've done that research. And once you have all of that in place and you're able to really confidently talk about what the need is, what you're going to try and accomplish, that's when the outputs and the outcomes come. And on every grant application, they're talking about what you've been able to accomplish. And they might call it different things, but essentially it boils down to your outputs being what you actually provided, right? So if you're a food bank, it would be X pounds of food, or we've served X number of families. And your outcome from that is going to be the impact that service created or that product created. And so you're going to be talking about, you know, improved nutrition possibly, or hunger going down in your community, or food deserts being removed because people have access to food. So you're trying to measure the benefit of what your output created. And that also needs to be based on research and understanding the evidence that already exists for how those solutions come to be. And maybe that evidence doesn't exist because you're doing something brand new and innovative. And then you're going to talk about the innovation that you're creating because other things haven't really worked. But you have to have a really strong handle on what already exists, how you're explaining it, and proving that you understand everything in a total picture. And that's how you're showing up to provide your services or your products to impact the community that you're in. Do we have any questions about any of the terms on here that maybe you've seen and weren't sure about, or how they kind of all work together? Nope, no questions? Okay, so once you are like, yes, we know what we're doing, we know how we're doing it, we know what impact we're trying to create, we have some type of way to measure that. That's really the hardest part. But we have something to build off of, right? It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be all the things that you need all at once, but that something exists for us to move forward with. Then we start to talk about, do you have all of the pieces ready to go? And are they organized and easy to find and use? And are they updated, right? And so this is a document checklist that we use to go over with folks. Basic contact information, because that goes on every application. The number of times I have to put, phone numbers and addresses and things is more than anything else I do in this work. Putting all of that information into an application. All of your financial and tax information, right? You need to have an organizational budget that's approved by your board. You need to have budgets for all of the programs or projects that are also part of the work that you're doing. You need to have access to financial statements at any given time throughout your fiscal year in the event a grant funder asks for it. You need to be up to date on your 990s, whatever form you fill out, depending on your size and your budget. If you do audits, if you are large enough to warrant financial audits, those need to be consistent and up to date. It gets really hard to have to explain to a funder in an application saying, well, we don't have our most recent 990. Here's our old one. We're trying to go through this and that or whatever. It just isn't a great look, although it happens. Those things are realities. And now that a number of people have been removed from the IRS department, getting questions and things answered as you go through is going to be even harder. So making sure you have access to somebody somewhere with a good handle on accounting and finances to be able to use as a resource if there are questions or things that pop up for your financial information. Some funders will tell you they look at your financial stuff before they look at anything else you tell them on an application. So making sure that you fiduciarily are exactly where you need to be with that information. So any project program information, and this can be a tricky one too, especially if you're new, especially if you're small, it's likely the way you talk about your services are under one umbrella. And funders overwhelmingly like to fund program costs versus indirect costs, general operating, overhead, whatever you want to call it. And so what we do often is help organizations kind of look at what they do, break it sort of into categories, and start to understand those things as an initiative or a program or a project, so that when we go to that application, we can say we're asking for X number of dollars for this program and be able to talk specifically about that rather than the organization as a whole. Board and other information. So things like your bylaws, your articles of incorporation. Sometimes you have to get a good standing certificate from the state of Missouri, organizational charts, if you have logic models, MOUs, if you have partnerships with other organizations, the history of your org, your diversity statement, although I think that's going to be less likely than it has been in the last 5 or so years. Staff resumes, all of those things sometimes are asked for. So know that you might have to provide them. If you don't have everything at once, be ready to figure out how to put them together when it's time for that application to upload. Any questions about this information? Cool, moving on. Okay, so how do you find funders? Where do you look? There are some ways you can do it for free, and there's some ways that you can pay for tools to assist you in that funder prospecting. One of the best things to do, especially if the services that you provide are local, is look around in your community. St. Louis Community Foundation is a great place to start because they manage funds for grant makers. They also partner with other philanthropic groups in the community, and they offer a lot of resources for organizations to figure out how to tap into different things like board development, or they partner with Catch a Fire, which can bring like a limited time volunteer that's an expert in some kind of thing to help you work through something in your organization. So they're a good place to start. You can just sort of start Googling, right? Like philanthropic grant makers in the city of St. Louis or in a region, and see sort of what comes up and start your own little database. You can look at other organizations that provide similar types of services, look at their annual reports or their website. They might call out funders as like a thank you or an appreciation kind of thing, or a sponsor, and you can start to look and see if that would be something that would be useful for you. Targeting banking organizations. They have responsibilities to provide support and dollars in their community through the CRA. I forget specifically legally what it's called. But sometimes they have foundations. Sometimes banks manage other grant making organizations. Commerce Bank, Bank of America, they have grant makers or foundations that come and fall under their kind of philanthropic advising, that they help with those sorts of things. Sign up for newsletters, right? Sign up for newsletters from the city of St. Louis. Sign up for newsletters from the, Missouri offices like the Department of Economic Development or these sorts of things, because they'll come out with local county or city initiatives where there might be grant opportunities. So get those things coming into your inbox. Takes a lot of kind of puzzle piecing together, but the information is out there, and you can find information about funders through their 990s. So if it's a foundation or a trust or some sort of tax charitable vehicle, they're going to have a 990, just like nonprofits have to fill out, and you can find out a lot of information about them. And there are plenty of places you can go for free to search 990s. It's just pretty time intensive. But start with your local contacts, start with your local networks. There's a thing called, I think, Philanthropy Together, and that lists collective giving groups in communities, right? So St. Louis has a handful of collective giving groups. You're not maybe going to find them on a prospecting tool, but maybe you know somebody who knows somebody, and you can reach out and start asking questions about people who care about giving to those sorts of things in their community. So when you're ready to invest in a tool to help you, the not for free options are, this is just some. There are other ones out there, and there are more kind of coming into the game. But one of the largest, most robust funder databases is Foundation Directory Online. People also kind of call it Candid. They merged. It was two different companies that merged some time ago. And it's pretty expensive to access those databases. It's a subscription style, cloud-based platform kind of situation. Now, a lot of libraries, and I know the St. Louis County Library, probably the St. Louis City Library, although I haven't specifically checked, have access to that database. And so you can go into the library and you can sit down with someone if you need assistance learning how to work through it, or you can just go and log into it from the library and start to search. And then you can like export all of that information into a spreadsheet or PDFs, save them to your drive, and then you can leave and you have access to that to explore more at your computer when you have time. GrantStation is a more affordable option. Anyone who is part of the Grant Professional Association has, through their membership, access to GrantStation. So I have access to it, but I don't use it a lot. I don't think it's the most user-friendly, and I tend not to find the things that I need, but it's a place to start at a much more affordable rate. They run certain promotions throughout the year where you can get it for like a couple $100s a year, versus FDO or Instrumental that can be like $1,500 to $2,000 to pay for those sorts of things. So there's a considerable cost difference between those. I use Instrumental most of the time, partly because it has a pretty good database, but it also includes the grant management. So I'm able to organize from a project management standpoint the funders that we're finding, if we've applied, if we were denied, if we were accepted, if there's a report, all of that's built into the platform for me to manage and use. And even when I was doing grant work, I didn't invest in these things until I was doing enough prospecting that it financially made sense to do that. So if you're a small or newer organization, it is highly unlikely it's going to make sense for you to invest in those sorts of things. If you are a large organization, it definitely might make sense as long as you have somebody with the experience and the expertise that's using it and managing it on a regular basis. Grants, Flux is an interesting one in that you can sign up for free to do the grant management part. So it's a free grant management tool. So if you're finding funders, you can manage the information in there. You're just inputting it manually, or you can choose to pay for their subscription, which is less expensive than some of the other ones, but the database isn't as large, to populate into your grant management. So you have some choice there, which is kind of interesting. On my website, I have a blog post that compares a lot of these tools, both for a prospecting and a grant management look. And there's a real handy sheet that you can look at, and there's links and pricing and all of that. So feel free to go to my website and look at that blog if you want to explore these options more. Any other questions on where to find possible funder matches? And here's the deal. Once you find, well, you know what? I have a slide for that. That's my next slide. So you found a funder. Now what do you do, right? And for people who are like, you know what, we just want to apply to a couple of things. We're only looking to bring in maybe $10,000 a year. It's going to be a very different process than organizations who are like, we need to bring in 300 grand from grant applications. Let's get to work, right? So when you find a fit, as it shows in whatever tool you're looking for, or you see a website and you think, oh, that makes sense. They seem to have priorities related to what we do. You really need to dig into that funder and get as much information as possible to understand if you applying is worth your time. And so you look at things like, where do they give their money? So those database tools are going to show you national funders and all of these sorts of things. And while the priorities might align, look and see, okay, have they ever even given in Missouri maybe? Or, oh, nope, they really only focus on coastal states, or their region is over here. So it's important to make sure they give it where you are, that what they care about is what you're doing. I'm hearing something. Is that from me or from someone else? If you can, take a look at the application, because sometimes what they say on their webpage that they give to, and then you look at the application and you think, well, they're not at all asking the same thing that's on their website. So that's really weird. And once you apply to one application, you've applied to one application. It is unusual to find the same application repeated, unless it's managed under a specific, like a community foundation or a bank or something that might streamline their application process. But funders can ask whatever they want in whatever form they want. So it might be a portal that you have to register in. It might be an online form that you have to copy the questions out of. It might be a downloadable PDF. It might be something in a really horrible format that you have to work and adjust in. And so in my part 2 of this that I sometimes give for organizations, we get into things like a master narrative or a language library of how to collect common questions. So you have narrative and content ready to go and move into those sorts of things. Because while they ask it in a lot of different ways, it's still very similar questions that they're trying to get at. And here in Missouri, I forget when it happened, but some people got together and put together the Missouri Common Grant application. So you might see local funders that just utilize that. And so it's the same budget worksheet, similar types of questions. But in general, you're going to come across a lot of different things. And here's a pro tip. Never, never, ever, ever fill out the questions directly in the form and think that you're good to go. Always take the questions, always take the application, always take the form, whatever it is, move it into a workable document in a draft kind of way, answer the things in that, and then move it back and submit it, because information gets lost, things don't update like they're supposed to, it gets really hectic. And then you have it in a nice place to be able to use and put in your language library or utilize and reference in the future. So always have your draft copy and then move that information into a portal or the form or whatever they're asking for. Also look and see, is there anybody involved in this grant making organization that we might have a connection to, or that our board might have a connection to, or that we should have a connection to, right? There's as much relationship building in the grant world as there is in major gifts and donor and individual gifts and those sorts of things. If they know you, your application's not the first thing they're seeing of you. And it's important that when there are opportunities to reach out and connect with the funder, that somebody in the organization is taking that opportunity. Because sometimes they'll just say, you know what, don't apply this year. We're really focused on this, that, or whatever. Apply next year. And that's really, really helpful information that you wouldn't have known, maybe just looking at their website or looking at their grant application. And then be ready for what it takes to track things. So just because you submit an application doesn't mean you're done. You need to make sure you have a process or a form or a template or some sort of organizational system that's tracking things as you go, because it might take 6, 7, 8 months before you hear back from a funder on an application. And a lot of things happen in that amount of time and you might forget. And if you don't have a central place where that information exists, you will forget. Also, if there's reporting requirements, you need to have a place to document that, so it's not a surprise when it's time to do the report. It's just really important that there is somebody who is in charge of managing the grant information, both the funder, how things were applied to, any notes that are along with that. And so we have different templates that we use with organizations. Oh no, that's in my second part. I'm not sure if I've linked those to the informational sheet. But really simple Google Doc that we've created so that it's easy and accessible for people to track information over time. Because next year, you're going to need to look back and say, okay, what happened last year? Who did we apply to? Who did we get something from? Because I promise you will not remember off the top of your head all of the information that goes into this work. So I think this is linked in my other thing. I'm not going to play it because we don't have a ton of time, but this is a video I pulled from a funder's website, very clearly telling applicants, look, this is what we're looking for, right? If you are showing up with an application that you pulled together yesterday and you don't have your research and you don't have the data to support what you're talking about, do not bother applying, because they can tell. Again, yours is not the only application they're looking at. And even if they care about the thing that you're doing, if you aren't able to communicate really effectively all the parts that go into that, and they can't see that you have got it figured out and that you are sustainable and stable, they're going to move on to the next one. So when you have a chance, I'm pretty sure I linked to this video that you can watch on your own. So once you're getting started, it really is just a cycle. Research funders, check for relationship building, review the application before you make a final decision. Some people start to create like go, no go matrices for your board or your staff to really understand, okay, what time is going to go into applying for this, knowing that we might not get the dollars. And what ends up happening is you start doing funder searches. For an example, if I am starting with a new organization and I put them into instrumental and it's keywords that I'm using to describe what their services are, it's going to populate based on those sorts of things. And we usually end up with hundreds of matches, right? You really don't have hundreds of matches. You have hundreds of things where there were some words that aligned. And it takes somebody to go through each one of those things to look at what's coming from the 990, to go to their website and compare that information, to look at the application, to decide, is this something we need to continue pursuing? And usually what it comes down to is, well, we're pretty close. Very rarely do we come across, hey, this is a perfect match. This is going to be awesome. It's usually like, some of the things work. Some of them, we're not quite sure. And so there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen within your organization. Is this worth the time? Is it not? Especially if it's things like, oh, this application is 15 pages long and they only give $2,000. Do you need $2,000 bad enough to spend possibly 20 hours applying on their ridiculous application because nobody stopped to tell them, hey, you're wasting our time. Give more money if you're going to require that much information. And so those kinds of decisions and conversations are going to be coming down the pike if you're getting into the grant work. Review your applications, make sure they are complete, make sure your information is accurate. Double check all of the contact information, because if they want to fund you and your address is written wrong or your email, there was something mistyped, you're not going to know, and then you don't get the money. So make sure all of that is good to go. Write your draft, edit it, submit, repeat. Look at your funder list, check for relationships, and this is a continuous process. And it's always funny to me on applications when grant makers are asking about sustainability. And I just want to scream from the rooftops, this is not sustainable. This process that we go through is not sustainable. The amount of time and effort, right? I calculate for each one of my clients. I've never stopped to calculate across the board how many hours we spend just completing applications for dollars that may or may not come in the door. And it's important to know that that's the cost you're measuring against the potential return on investment. And I don't have a slide in here, but usually I have one that talks about a typical grant application can take 15 to 20 hours, depending on where you are in the process, right? Early on, it's going to take a lot more time for you to get your bearings and to put the information in versus you've been doing this for a while and you have a great content library and you're able to move things really effectively and really efficiently. And it takes about 10 to 12 applications. The average is about every 10 or so applications in a mid-sized organization that's doing grant writing on a regular basis to be funded. And those are wide generalizations, right? It's very different from organization to organization, but that's the most data I've been able to find trying to kind of nail down into a single understandable kind of average among organizations. And then it's talking about who should be doing this work. Once you are familiar with the work, once you're ready to move forward in a really structured, effective way, is it people who are already in-house that take on new tasks? Is it something you contract out? Is it a volunteer that you train to handle some of these kinds of things? Is it fractional services and you bring someone on to do really specific, like you bring someone on just to do the prospecting, right? I did a project really recently where all they wanted us to do was do the initial search, took 20 to 30 hours for us to go through the different things and hand them a list of really maybes for them to explore further. Or are you bringing someone in to do all of the work for you? Is it ongoing? Is it one time? Is it a long-term investment? And a little bit of context for deciding that. Oops, wrong way. Why is it going backwards? There we go. This was pulled from the Grant Professional Association. They do an annual salary survey every year and survey people within the grant profession. And so to give you an idea, if you are looking to pay someone specifically to do this work, or maybe you're the one being paid to do this work and need to compare what you're being paid. Hourly rate as a part-time or full-time employee, it was $37.62 for the mean, $35 for the average. Hourly rate as a consultant is over 91 for the mean and 81 for the median. And so when you're thinking about budgeting for this type of work, this could be helpful in helping you understand what that could cost for your organization to look into these sorts of things. Okay, that's my time. Ooh, right at time. So told you we were going to go through it really quickly. And again, this wasn't so that you leave being like, yes, I'm ready to go apply to all of the applications. The goal is that you're able to say, okay, maybe there were some things that I didn't know. I have a better understanding of like where the dollars come from and how they really work in communities. Maybe I need to go ask somebody and explore this a little bit more, or maybe I need to talk with my staff to understand, or maybe we had somebody in the past who did this work. I need to go learn a little bit more about them. So I can stay on for a little bit. I'm not sure if we have to cut the call now that we're at time, but I'm happy to answer any questions or just kind of listen to people's experiences of how this has all landed with you so far.
Patrice, we can stay until they cut us off, as long as
Okay.
people, if they have questions.
All right. Does anyone have a question or A
Hi,
frustration,
Patrice.
that's something?
Hi, Patrice. This is Mercedes Jacobs, and I'm new to the ROBA board. I'm
Hi.
president of ROBA as of 3 months. So, grant writing, of course, is of an interest to me, and continual funding for our area. Unfortunately, most of the program is facilitated by a grant. We do ask for charitable giving. Very little has been the history of private donors.
Mm.
So we're looking to utilize networks in that capacity and other revenue streams within St. Louis. So I'm probably green at this, and I will be reaching out to the St. Louis Community Foundation as well as you for additional assistance and guidance. And you may steer me in other directions as well to help me. You mentioned research, facilitating or explaining the impact of your grant. And that's from a professional realm, I'm aware of that should be a supporting document, to justify for any justification. But do you have any particulars that you may suggest? And it may be situational to your non-for-profit, of course, but any general databases or research, I guess, vehicles that may be free in that way. I know that sometimes the state of Missouri may provide data, but anything to kind of help shore that in for me in supporting. I facilitated one grant request that I'm working on. I did that independently and it was seamless a little, but I know that we need more funding beyond grants and asking for private donors, and I'll need to be more specific moving forward.
Yeah, so as far as like content research, right? Data research, there are some really great tools. And actually in my part 2 series of this, we get into that, and I have a template that I use with organizations so that when you're finding those statistics, when you're finding that data, when you're finding the information about your target population or the community, this is kind of where you put it and structure it so you can pull it really seamlessly into how you're talking about what you're doing. And some great places to start. Oh, and I wanted to mention for anyone who's still on there, also on my website, I have a resource guide. So it's just, you put your email in to get this really extensive list that's broken down into categories. So like grant training, grant tools, or nonprofit management, or accounting, or like all of these different things. Research is one on there. And the only reason I asked for an email is because I do quarterly kind of resource emails. I don't sell you anything. I don't have time to do that. And marketing is always really icky to me. So it's just a great resource that you can use. Most of them are national because most of the people that utilize that just come from a lot of different places. But as far as research goes, a couple places to start are Missouri or county health rankings is a great place to get a look at a ton of different metrics and measuring the health of a community. And so you could look for St. Louis City, you could look for St. Louis County, or compare the two, which can sometimes be really helpful when you're talking about differences. And also based out of the University of Missouri, Columbia, I forget the name of the full kind of research office that does it, but they put out something called Spark Maps. And though you can pay for it, it gets kind of expensive. Their free version is really very useful, and you can very easily look up and map out tons and tons of different data that comes from ACS estimates and Census Bureau and all of these different places that have these running data sources. They compile it and you can look at it in a map view, or you can run a community needs assessment by clicking certain things that you're looking for. So if you want to do education, or if it's food assistance and nutrition, or maybe it's seniors, or maybe it's youth, there's all of these different ways you can use those tools. And I use them constantly when I'm working with organizations to really understand the data behind what they're talking about and what they're trying to do. So the other part, yeah, we kind of talked about the research of the funders, right? It gets really tricky if you're not in a place to pay for where that information exists. And there are more and more people who are like, hey, I'm going to tap into this. I'm going to create a database, because all they do really is pull 990s and then just make sense of the information on it in nice visual ways for people to use the information easily. And so for organizations that are like, we're not going to subscribe to that, I would recommend seeking out a grant professional in your community to help you with that prospecting piece. And they can get you a really robust list for you to start with if you have staff that can weed through things a little bit more, and that provides some more cost savings and affordability. If you have someone do the search for you, make sense of it, provide you the information if you have a volunteer or someone on staff that can look more deeply into each funder when it's time to consider them for a grant opportunity. So I hope, Mercedes, I hope that answered your question.
That was very helpful. I am working with a grant writer as well in some capacities, but I'm learning more. Again, I'm only 3 months into this, and so I'm still learning more about how we need to progress forward. But that's very helpful. And I'll be reaching out to you, Patrice. Thank you.
And yeah, in the Grant Professional Association, we have a St. Louis chapter that's really very active. So of course, if you're a member of the association, you have access to more benefits. But the monthly trainings and conversations and webinars that happen are open to anybody. You might just pay like $20 to attend them or something. It's really very affordable, and go over a lot of very useful topics for people that might not be tapped into the grant community directly. And plus, you know, there are tons of other types of grant training opportunities out there. Those are all listed on, not all, but some of them are listed on my guide. And in the St. Louis County Library, like they've reached out to me to do some different trainings, and they have a big conference that they do for small businesses and nonprofits coming up that she's finding all of the people to do their sessions. And so there's big firms too, like the Rome Group and Let's Build Hope and these different groups that also do boot camps and training. So getting tapped into some of those resources can be really helpful as you're learning and moving.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? So I have a sense, if anybody's comfortable in the chat, does it make you feel hopeful about moving forward and figuring things out, or does it make you feel like, what the heck? Why is it so hard? It's really helpful for me to get a sense of people who are learning and moving into this information to understand like what you were coming in thinking, and if some of this information challenged, because what I tend to experience with folks is there's this sense that there's just like this robust free money out there, and all you have to do is fill out an application. And really what it comes down to is a lot more work that goes into it, and people are really surprised. And so a lot of what we do in those conversations is just sort of breaking whatever assumptions existed and trying to fill it in with the reality and the truth of how this actually works. Mercedes is hopeful. Good.
Well, this is Mercedes again. Yes, I'm very hopeful. Again, grants are very specific and curtailed to specific areas and arenas. And sometimes you're needing more of it to establish the budget for expenditures and professional services. But if you're only facilitated by grants, that could be a challenge to have expenses for professional services and needs. So I'm learning as I grow, but that is one of the challenges since most of the funding is only grant at this time.
Yeah. And you know what? There's actually a really interesting project that I'm a part of that's looking across the state of Missouri at accessible dollars. Where do these dollars exist? Who has access to them? And of course, most of it is in the Kansas City metro area, the St. Louis metro area. And we have a ton of rural areas throughout the state that are just not being able to tap into because funders tend to be also very geographically preferenced, right? So here in St. Louis, there is a lot of charitable philanthropic money, a lot of it. There are a lot of high wealth families that generations of them have started foundations, or they each have their own DAFs, or a lot of things like that. And there's a lot of money transacted here in the St. Louis area, like a lot for a lot of different services. And it's generally people who care about something, but we end up in a situation usually when there's this wealth disparity of folks with access to that type of wealth and power and folks who are doing work on the ground are not really connecting in authentic, open ways, right? And so we're just kind of working to satisfy all of these funder requirements, which makes doing the work that much harder. And so as often as we can have these really open, authentic dialogues between all of the people in this ecosystem is really important, I think. Oh, my website is avillageforgood.com. I probably could have put that on you. Someone asks, what strategies can a nonprofit organization use to increase the number of recurring donation from individual donors? Oof. Well, so you're getting into an area that's not my expertise, and I intentionally stay out of that because I just don't do well in like individual donor kinds of things. There are a lot of strategies and there's a lot of stuff going on looking at like the psychology of how people give. And generally what they say is keeping a donor is a lot less expensive than having to find new donors all the time. So whatever you can do to maintain strong relationships through information sharing or invitations to different things is going to be a high strategy, because you're keeping people who already care about what you're doing in with you rather than constantly having to go replace that donor with somebody new. But things are changing, right? The way we engage with information is changing like crazy. There's so much happening through social media stuff now. There are so many tech solutions that are coming in to provide stuff, and CRMs that can do this and that and whatever. So it's definitely its own world of nonprofit revenue and fundraising, and one that I just probably keep a distance from as much as I can. All right. Actually, I want to make sure I didn't have something on my. Okay, good. I was like, make sure I didn't have a 12 o'clock. I'm good to go. Any other questions? I did want to mention, as far as individual donor strategies, also, that the St. Louis Community Foundation Give Day is coming up in May. And for the small organizations I work with, I do encourage them to figure out if that fits into some of their funding strategy. It can build your networks, and it's the foundation makes it really user-friendly and accessible to manage how that happens on the platform that they use. And so if it's not something you've considered, take a look at their website. They have other trainings coming up, and it could be a great way to get maybe a couple $1,000s in the door, or to go through the process of figuring out how do you enter into a campaign, right? A planned campaign where you are engaging people in different forms of communication to bring them to one place, one particular time, to give some dollars. And then how do you build off that donor base? How do you keep them involved in your organization? So it could be just a really great opportunity to try something new or something different in your organization if you haven't participated in that yet. United Way, I have some feelings about United Way. They're an interesting model, and there are some significant benefits of that type of giving, but there are also some things that become really inaccessible and challenging for different sized organizations through that particular kind of model. And I know United Ways are designed in different kinds of ways. And I actually worked for them. I did corporate campaigns for them early on in my career, right after I graduated from graduate school, and went around to the corporations and, did the events to get donors to give. But there are some that if you get money from United Way, you also have blackout dates that you're not allowed to fundraise during times that they're fundraising. So like there's some things in there that I think could probably be reworked to be more accessible to more organizations. But that's my opinion. Howard asks, how will it be available? Everything will be emailed after, is that right?
The slide deck will be posted on the website underneath your description.
Gotcha.
Did you get that?
So come back to the website for those great.
Yeah, I will send you a list of everyone who signed up. I'll
Oh,
send you
I
their
have a list of
emails.
that. Oh, okay, then I can also send, make sure you
Right.
guys,
And you have your website, but on the website where they signed up, where the training website is, after we complete the trainings, we post the video of the Zoom meeting, and then we post the deck as well.
Gotcha. Well, if everyone's done, I appreciate you being here. I hope this was helpful. I'll definitely follow up with some of that information you can put somewhere handy and use on your own. And I hope you have it's going to be beautiful here this week. And I know a lot of spring breaks are starting to happen, so take some time for yourself if you can. I know the spring is busy fundraising season. There's a lot of events and galas going on right now. I'm in charge of my kids' preschool fundraiser. I did not ask to do that. Somebody forced me into it. So for all of you who are participate in the event part of it, I feel you. All those trivia night silent auctions that St. Louis is known for, those are hot and heavy right now.
Well, thank you very much, Patrice, for your expertise. I think, again, to use a little bit of a pun, this is going to be very valuable for those who paid attention, who joined us today.
I hope so. I hope it gets you on the start to the right path so that you're not going down the wrong one.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for, again, Patrice, for presenting, and we will look for your stuff on our website after we conclude everything.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.